Welcome back to the Daily Rewind, and I hope that you enjoyed this new set. Almost kind of still work in process, so I hope you enjoyed. If you have any recommendations for it, leave it in your comments, and I may or may not listen to them. But anyways, today is June the 13th, and today is National Frosted Cookie Day. On this day in 1966, the Miranda Rights were established. These rights are required to be read to you by police personnel before being questioned. Suspects have to know their rights before being questioned. If you have watched a lot of cop TV shows, you see them do it as they are being handcuffed, and it still does in the real world as you are being handcuffed. Now, I have not been handcuffed, and a lot of police agencies have it different, but if you do it as soon as you are handcuffed, make sure that you are briefed on these rights, because if you aren't briefed on the rights, conviction can be overturned, just like Ernesto Miranda. So, see, the story is on March 2nd, 1963, an 18-year-old Phoenix woman told police that she had been abducted, driven to a desert area, and was raped. Detectives questioned her story and put out a bolo, be on the lookout, for the suspect. Once it was narrowed down to just one, Ernesto Miranda, who also happened to have a prior record, was brought in for a lineup. And if you don't know what a lineup is, it's where everyone gets in a line. One's the only suspect, or two suspects, depending on how many suspects there are for the event, and non-suspects. And the victim is supposed to point out the suspect. Well, Ernesto Miranda was pointed out in the lineup, and he was interrogated without knowing his rights. And it is debated of what happened between the key details, but we do know is that he was interrogated, and the interrogators left the room with a conviction, and he was proven guilty. But he appealed, saying that he didn't know he had the right to remain quiet. He claimed that he was coerced into a conviction, and the Civil Liberties Union took up the appeal, claiming that his confession was false and coerced. The case went up all the way to Supreme Court, Miranda v. Arizona, and his conviction was overturned, but he was retried and convicted in October 6, 1968. October 1966, remaining in prison until 1972. Ernesto Miranda was later stabbed to death in the men's room of a bar after a poker game in January 1976. As a result of the case, every person being questioned needs to be informed of their rights while in custody. And these are the following rights. Now, some people say it a little bit different, but this is like the official I got off the internet. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say and do can be used in the court of law. If you have the right to an attorney, you have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Some say one will be appointed for you. Do you understand these rights that I just read to you? With these rights in mind, do you wish to speak to me? In 1807, Thomas Jefferson receives a subpoena to testify in the treason trial of his former Vice President Aaron Burr, becoming the first president to be subpoenaed. For the presiding Chief Justice John Marshall ruled that a sitting president was subject to a judicial process. However, Jefferson did not appear in person. However, he did provide some, keyword some, of the documents that Burr had requested in the subpoena to exonerate him from treason. Thomas Jefferson invoked that he was protecting the public interest. Burr was found not guilty by lack of evidence. And speaking of the Supreme Court, in 1967, Thurgood Marshall was nominated by the Supreme Court by Lyndon Baines Johnson to fill in the seat that would be vacant by the retiring Justice Tom C. Clark. The Senate did confirm the nomination by a vote of 69 to 11, making him the first African American in history to sit on America's highest court. And then in 1907, the Pentagon Papers was published by the New York Times. Daniel Ellsberg, who was the former Defense Department analyst, had gone rogue and very anti-war with the war going on in Vietnam. He tried to turn these over to anti-war senators and representatives with no avail to help Congress rein the war in. He turned them over to the New York Times, and the New York Times published them with the title of The History of the U.S. Decision-Making Process to Vietnam, which later became known as the Pentagon Papers. They revealed private communications, recommendations, and major decisions surrounding Americans' involvement in Vietnam. The papers covered the Eisenhower years as well as Kennedy and Johnson's administrations. When the New York Times began publishing the documents, it created a nationwide controversy. Members of Congress, diplomats, and government officials debated whether the information should have remained classified and how much the American public deserved to know about the ongoing conflict and the decisions that led to the country deeper into the Vietnam War. And then last event for today in 2017, Otto Warmier returns to North America from North Korea. Otto Warmier was a 22-year-old student and was taken into custody in January of 2016 after taking a propaganda poster in North Korean airport and was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. But however, he lived in very harsh conditions.
Please save my life. Please think of my family.
And by March, he was in a coma, and North Korea reached out to the United States for an emergency meeting to negotiate release terms for Otto. Otto was flown back to Ohio, where he spent his final days in Cincinnati Medical Center, where he died, unfortunately. And because of this, the United States put out an advisory banning all Americans from traveling to North Korea. That's going to wrap up today's trip through history. Hope y'all enjoy this episode. Y'all have a great one. Make sure to subscribe/follow wherever you are listening on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're on like Spotify or Apple Music, make sure that you rate this podcast 5 stars. This helps us grow in the rankings and gain more followers. And follow us on social media at the Daily Rewind Pod, and share this podcast with your friends, family, and even enemies, because your enemies deserve to know the history. Y'all have a great day. Peace. Thank you for listening to the Daily Rewind. If you enjoyed this show, please do not forget to subscribe to where you're listening at and give us a rating where you're listening at, whether that's Spotify or Apple. This helps us move up in the ratings and grow our show. We're also on social media at the Daily Rewind Pod. That's Daily Rewind Pod on all social media platforms. You have a great one. Until next time.